Welcome back to another payment integration video, again using Cybersource payment gateway. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to use the payer authentication API to authenticate your transactions with EMV 3DS. Here on the left side is a demo of what we're trying to implement. You enter your card information, you hit pay, and then 3DS starts. The thing collects data about the client side, then it's going to present the challenge page. Now this is the OTP page typically for your bank simulator though. Hit submit, then the authentication is done, then the payment is sent, and then you get redirected just like in the previous video. So what we've basically done here is that we took the microform integration from the previous video and then we added 3DS flow to it. We're going to be following this integration guide over here, and we're going to be implementing 3 new APIs: setup, 3DS, check enrollment, and valid enrollment. And then we're going to be using the same payment API in the previous video but with additional data. So let's go ahead and start with a brand new project and then show you guys how to implement this. Okay, so the first step will be to collect data about the client side. We're going to be embedding an invisible iframe here that's going to be collecting information about this web page and then sending it to the card bank to help the card bank determine whether or not this transaction requires a authentication with one-time password. And to do that, we're going to need to follow step 1 and 2 here in the official guide. But basically, we're going to be using this API request here, authentication setups, and we're going to be passing to it the token that we obtained from our microform. This is the microform. I modified the code here to just print out the token instead of sending the token for payment. Let's generate a token. Here's the token. You could just grab that, go to Postman, put it here, send it, and this is the response that you'll get. And then you're going to use the data here, especially access token and then device collection URL, to build a iframe, an invisible iframe, using this sample over here to allow the card bank to collect data about this payment page. Our first step will be to implement this API request here on our server side. Okay, so just like every video, I use Firebase to host my Node.js endpoints, and here is the project file folder that I'm going to create, that I'm going to develop my Node.js endpoint to call this API. So let's go ahead and implement it here. Now, just like I mentioned in my previous video, the nice thing about Cybersource APIs is that once you implement one, implementing the others is as easy as just copy pasting. So I'll do that. Copy paste my endpoint from my previous video here, rename it. I already installed my dependencies. I'm just gonna change the path and I'm just gonna change the payload. Okay, and this transient token JWT is the token that we get from the microform from the client side. So I'll just do request, body, and then token. That's all. Now I'm confident enough that I can just deploy this right away without testing it. So let's just do that and then implement it in the client side. Alright, my endpoint got deployed. Now I'm gonna just copy this and implement it in my client side. Here at pay button click, this is the method that triggers the microform JavaScript library to collect the card information, push it to Cybersource, tokenize it, and then return the token back here. So here I'm gonna be passing this to another method. Let's just call it setup 3DS, and here I'm going to be implementing my API request. Okay, so I just now need to pass the token that I get from here. I'm not going to pass it directly in the method. I'm going to create a reference, and I'm going to create a reference, and then we're going to store the token in that, and then I'm going to just pass that reference of the token around my code. That's the better way of doing it. So just like how I have a reference here for microform, I'm gonna create a reference for my token, and then I'm gonna store the token in it by just doing my token current equal the token that I got. Cool. And then I'm gonna just use this here. Now as soon as the token is generated and assigned, I'm going to call this API call. Cool. Now let's test this and see if it works. It's working. I'm receiving the response here from the API that I just created. So I'm going to copy that and I'm going to use it later to demonstrate my next step. So I'm just going to put it here in a test.json file for now, because maybe I'll need it later. I already have one here. Okay, so this is my response from that API call. Now, the next step here is I'm going to be implementing that invisible iframe. Using that data, I'm going to build that invisible iframe that's going to collect data about my client side. So, okay, so now I need to create a component that's going to contain that HTML sample that I showed you guys earlier. That's going to render the invisible iframe that will collect data. So let's do that here. Okay, and now what you're going to need to get from your API response is the access token, which is going to go here in JWT. So this should be a parameter. And this action URL, this also is going to be from your API response. Okay, so now we need to create a state variable in microform here that's going to collect the API response that we get from the setup 3ds API call. So here, just do setup data setup data, and that's going to be null for now. Alright, it's upset. It's upset because this has no value, so I'm just going to put a placeholder value like that. Alright, now what you're going to use this for is you're going to use it to display that invisible iframe based on the input that you get from here. So here in return, you need to create a conditional component rendering like this. So if setup data is not null, then you're going to display that frame that we just created, and you're going to pass in that frame setup data. This is going to be a prop for this component, and this should have an onComplete method that's gonna be called when the data collection is complete. I'm just gonna put a placeholder here for it. I'm just gonna put placeholder here for it for now. Now you go back here, and we need to fix some of these errors. Give me a second to do that. This is not React friendly, so you need to fix this. And now this over here, you're gonna be getting it from this. So here you just do setup data, and then go to your sample. It's going to be consumer authentication information, and it's going to be access token, and here it's going to be the URL, device collection URL. So just copy this, put it here, and then take this. All right, so that should be all. Now actually that's not all. We need to add some JavaScript here to submit this form and inject the iframe. So here there's a sample code that shows you how to do that. So you need to take this and implement it inside the useEffect method in that component, so that it's activated as soon as the component mounts. Like this, except you don't need to use onload because useEffect has the same effect as onload, so just put it like this. There's another JavaScript for receiving the data, this one. You also need to copy this whole thing. This will add a listener that tells the app that the data collection is complete. So you just put this listener here. Now, because sometimes in HTML things lag, I recommend that you wrap this and set timeout. Now you should put onComplete here because this will get called when the data collection is complete, and that's how you can tell your app that the data collection is done. So let's just do that. Now let's test this out and see if it works. There you go. It's the invisible iframe is loaded, and it's loaded and it's done. It's complete. Now we need to move on to the next step, which is the check enrollment API. After we get the notification that tells us that the data collection is done, we need to call this API over here, check enrollment sample, and use the data that we got from the setup 3ds API, this API, to fill in the reference ID here. Let me give you a sample of the response for this. Okay, this is what the response looks like. Here it's gonna tell you, the cardholder is enrolled in pair authentication, and then the 3DS is required. And then you're gonna use this URL, step up URL, and this access token over here to then create the iframe that's gonna show that one-time password page. So this is the project folder for my check enrollment API endpoint. I'm gonna implement it here. I'm just gonna copy what I did here and again change some stuff. I'm gonna change the URL, and I'm gonna change the payload. Okay, now we need to collect from the client side the currency, the amount, the JWT token, and the reference ID. Okay, now this is what you collect from your client side, or depending on how you implemented this thing and how you want to implement this thing, you'll collect. You can also get this information from your server. But I'm doing it for my client side, but just for the demo's sake. So let's just add this into our JSON payload. Okay, now a note on this parameter over here, return URL. So this is the URL that the card bank will send you the authentication result on. So after the authentication is done and the user finishes entering the one-time password, the card bank is going to send a post request on this URL that you gave them to tell you that the authentication is done, and this is the authentication ID. You need to include this, but for now, because we didn't implement this yet, we're going to just use this URL as a placeholder, and this will just show us the data that was posted to the server, and you're going to see that in a bit. But there's one more thing you need to add to this URL. You need to append a parameter called card type. This is going to be important for the next step. You'll see why. And how do you get this card type? You're going to get this card type from this token parameter. You got to decode this token and get the card type from it. And I'm going to show you how, but first we need a sample token. And I'm going to use an online JavaScript compiler to show you how we can decode this. Okay, so a JWT token is basically 3 base 64 encoded strings connected by a dot, like this dot over here. So first step is you need to split those 3 components. You're going to use split method. Okay, now they're split. Now this JWT token components are, the first one is called the header, the second one is called the payload, and the third one is called the signature. Now the data that we need is in the payload part, and to get that, this is just an array, so just do 1. There you go. Now you need to decode this. A to B, use the method A to B, and that's going to get you the decoded payload. There you go. Now this is returned as a string. You need to convert it to JSON. To do that, just do wrap all of this in JSON, parse. Now you got the JSON. Now the card number is going to be inside content. Now we got to go inside number. Payment information, card, number. Cool, we're almost there. Now here it is. Detected card type is an array. We need to get the first element of this array. So dot card type, and then just do 0. And that should get us the card type as a string. Nice. Now we have a 1-line code that we could use to decode this token and get the card type out of it. Just take this, go back to your code, and here create a variable called card type, and just copy paste that code right here, and that's going to give you that card type. And then take this and append as a parameter here. Everything should be good here. Just deploy this to production and use it in the client side as well. Okay, so my endpoint got deployed here. I'm going to copy this and implement it on my client side. Inside microform, I need to implement a new method called check enrollment. And in this method, I'm going to call that API that I just implemented. Okay, now here, let's see what I need. I need, why did I close it? I need currency, amount, reference ID, token. So let's go ahead and get those. And the reference ID, I'm going to be getting that from the payload from setup 3DS data, setup data. So this is going to be setup data, consumer authentication information, reference ID. And that should be all. Okay, now we call this, we get the response, and here we're going to display it for you guys. So you can see what we got back. And I need to also create another state variable, just like this one, but for the enrollment data, because I'm going to be using that across my code. So enrollment data and set data. Go ahead and use this here. Cool. Now let's just test this so we can show you guys what's the output. First I need to call this. I'm not using it, so go here, go to setup frame component, and on complete, that's where you're gonna be calling that method, check enrollment. Okay, refresh, let's do this. Okay, we got a problem. I messed up something in one of my configurations. I think I shouldn't have included this here, so I'll remove it and try again. Okay, there we go. I got it here. This is the response. Let's just copy the response and keep it for our reference to use it later. Here. This is what we got. Okay, now I need to use this data to create the challenge frame that I showed you guys earlier. I'm going to be doing it the same way we implemented this over here. So let's go ahead and create another component that's going to contain the HTML for the one-time password page. Okay, to get your HTML sample, go to the guide. It's going to be here in step frame, and it's going to be here in creating the frame, I think. Yeah, here it is. Grab it, put it in your code, and clean it up. Alright guys, when you're in a situation like this, you need an AI help. So I'm going to copy this, go here. Clean up, don't do anything like the params. Okay, let's copy this, put it here. Much better, right? Okay, now since we got everything here, let's also do our own cleaning. First of all, the width. I don't want it to be 400. I want it to be full size of the width, full size of the page. Now this JWT, I'm gonna get it from enrollment data, and this is gonna be called access token, and the link that's going to go here also from enrollment data, this is going to be called step up URL. Now we also need some JavaScript magic to get this thing to load. Make sure to, here it just has a name property, make sure to also add an ID property so we can find it with the JavaScript. Okay, to get the JavaScript, go back to the official website. Here, go to invoking the iframe, and here's going to be the JavaScript that we can use to load that iframe. You're going to take this and you're going to put it inside a use effect like we did for the previous iframe. Like this. We also need to render this. Now the way we're going to be rendering the challenge frame is different from the setup frame. So the way we're going to be doing this is we're going to go here, and in here we're going to create a conditional render. So we're going to say if check enrollment has data in it, sorry, not check enrollment, if enrollment data, then we're going to render that. If not, then we're going to render everything else like this. Here we're going to be rendering challenge frame and pass it with the enrollment data, and use the onComplete to know when the challenge is done. And I'm going to put a placeholder here for now. I think now we can test it. Okay, there you go. We're getting the authentication page. Now let's enter this, hit submit, and then it's going to post to that URL that I showed you guys. And that URL, all it does, this URL, it sent a post to this URL and it added the card type on top of it. So that URL, all that it does is that it just displays what was sent to it. So I get the transaction ID, authentication transaction ID, like I told you guys, and I'm getting back the card type here as a query params. So this concludes this step, the redirect to the challenge step. Now let's move on to the next step, which is validating the authentication result. Okay, to get the authentication result, we need to use this API over here, validate enrollment, which takes in the just the transaction ID that we got here and the card type that we sent to it, and it gives you this response. It's going to tell you the authentication result, authentication successful. So we're going to be implementing this in our server as well. We're going to do it here, and we're going to implement the same old routine: copy, paste, and change some stuff. Okay, yeah, that's all. Now this we're going to be getting from the request body. It's going to be transaction ID with capital letters, with capital T, because that's how it is here. And now this we're going to get it as a query param from the URL. And to get it as a query param, you got to do it like this. You got to do card type, and then you got to do new search URL search. Was it your, yeah, and then here you're going to put in your request URL, and you're gonna do get, and you're gonna get card type. That's what we named it, right? Yeah, card type, like this. And then this is what you're gonna be using here. Oh, and don't forget to change the name of your API after you copy paste it. Validate. Okay, now that's almost all. One thing remaining. So here we're not going to be just returning a JSON payload. We're going to be communicating a message back to the client side through the iframe, and we're going to have to do a special way to do that. We're going to be passing back to the client side a script. Yes, a JavaScript script wrapped in an HTML script tag like this, and it says send this message to the client side, to the parent of the iframe. So that's why it says here if parent is not window. So here I'm going to send a message called that says close iframe, and I'm going to send this data, which is just the JSON response that we got here, which is basically I'm going to send back this, and I need to send it because I need to get the XID and the CVV value. So that's all here. Let's go ahead and deploy this to production. Okay, so my endpoint for that got deployed, and now I'm not going to be using this in my client side actually. I'm going to be using it here and my check enrollment API endpoint. So here I'm going to have the system calls this post instead. We need to redeploy this with a new URL. In the meantime, while that is deploying, I need to implement another JavaScript code in my my challenge frame. I need to add this piece of code here that's gonna listen to that data that I sent back from my API call. So this is gonna listen to this, not this, sorry, to this. And once it gets it, it's gonna return this, the server response and the incomplete call. I'm gonna log it for you guys. So here in the incomplete, on the challenge frame, instead of doing just done, I'm just gonna print out the data that I'm getting. So E, and here I'm gonna log that data for you guys so you can see. Now let's check if this is working. Okay, I'm getting the challenge. Submit. Now I shouldn't see anything here after it's done. It should just close, and it did close, and this is the data that I get back from the server. And this concludes this step, and now we can move on to the next step, which is authenticated payment. Okay, now this is probably the easiest step and the last step and the easiest step. We're going to be using the data that we received from the authentication from the validate API, XID, CAVV, to perform the authenticated payment. And it's going to be the same API that we used in the previous video, like this. You're going to put the token here, and you're going to put the CAVV and the XID here. So let's just grab the token that we used just now. I want to show you how this API looks. Use it here. Grab the CAVV and the XID here. Paste it. Oh, it's the same value. So send that, and you get a response. This is the payment response. It's going to say authorized. That's how you know if it's successful. Nice. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and implement this in my Firebase server endpoint as well. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, we added the fields that we need. We got rid of the fields that we don't need. And now we just need to generate one more. We need to generate a random reference ID for our transaction. You could just ask ChatGPT for a code that does that. There you go. Grab that. Go back to your code. You can just paste it here, and then take this, and this is going to be your reference. Again, if you're going to copy paste, don't forget to rename your endpoint. I think I got everything here. This should be fine. So let's go ahead and deploy it to production, and then use it in the client side. While that is getting deployed, let's go ahead and make the necessary preparations in our checkout page. So here, what you want to do is after you receive the data and on complete, you want to call a new method called send payment, and here's where you're going to be implementing the authenticated payment API call. Okay, so for the CAVV and the XID, you're going to get it from the auth data passed to this method. So here on the challenge frame, you need to pass the data that you get to send payment. So just here it's going to be just send payment, and you're going to get this data. And here auth data is going to be auth data, consumer authentication information is going to be CAVV. And the same thing with the XID. So that should be it. Now we just gotta wait for the endpoint to finish deploying, and then we're gonna put it here. This is it here. This should be ready to use. But now let's do the final step, which is to redirect to the result page after the payment is done. So for that, we need to do, first let me print out the response for you guys so you can see. Cybs response data, and here it's going to be window location assigned to change the page, and then it's going to be the result page address here. In my case, it's just localhost /result, and then add the parameter for the reference equal to plus, it's going to be cyber response data, and you'll get that in client reference information, and inside it was going to be code. That should be all. We are now ready to do an end-to-end test. Okay, let's refresh and do this again. Enter your card number, expiry, CVV, hit pay, data collection from the page, checking enrollment, then you get the challenge, and then you enter the OTP, you complete the challenge, you hit submit, the authentication is complete, you get the authentication result, you perform the payment, you get redirected to the result page. That's it, and that's that. So easy. And this is how to implement Cybersource authentication, payer authentication API, along with your microform integration, and how to embed the challenge page in your checkout page so that you don't have to redirect the customer outside your website. Hope this was helpful. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions because I was talking too fast, leave them in the comments. If you like this video, hit like or subscribe. If you want to get the full source code for the video so that you don't have to build this from scratch and save yourself some time, check the Patreon link in the description box below. That's going to support the channel, and you get the source code in return. Otherwise, you could completely implement this on your own following this video and the official guide, of course. Okay, that's all for today. I'll see you next time.